security forces. This is how far they have come. From this point onwards, we will know whether...
The next generation, your children and grandchildren, do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and then going out again.
Unidad, Luta, Progreso. Unity, struggle, and progress. The motto of tiny West African nation Guinea Bissau. Couldn't be farther from the truth. It is ironic that in 28 years of independence, it has known more divisive struggle and oppression than unity and progress. And it is progress ECOWAS hopes to achieve. 600 West African troops have been given the unenviable task of restoring order to one of Africa's most unstable states. Last month, ECOWAS had heaved a sigh of relief at the conduct of presidential polls, which were considered peaceful. The aftermath, rather, has been puzzling. Both presidential candidates for the runoff poll are on the run without any hope they will ever get to the ballot after a military takeover. Such is the mayhem in the notorious cocaine haven that the uproar has been unprecedented. Economic and political sanctions from the African Union to the UN Security Council has been met with stiff-necked defiance from the junta in Bissau. I am Aogo Obo, and this is Global Perspectives. Guinea-Bissau is a fascinating country. Only 14% of its population speak the official language, Portuguese. The larger majority speak Creole, a Portuguese-based Creole language. Never in the Lusophone nation's history has a president completed a 5-year tenure. Coups and counter-coups have lined the history of Guinea-Bissau. An armed rebellion beginning in 1956 by the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde under the leadership of Amilcar Cabral began the push for the independence of both countries and gradually consolidated its hold on the then Portuguese Guinea. Unlike guerrilla movements in other Portuguese colonies, Cabral's group rapidly extended its military control over large portions of the territory. Aided by the jungle-like terrain, it easily reached borderlines with neighboring allies and large quantities of arms from Cuba, China, the Soviet Union, and left-leaning African countries. Cuba also agreed to supply artillery experts, doctors, and technicians. Cabral even managed to acquire a significant anti-aircraft capability in order to defend itself against aerial attack. By 1973, Amilcar Cabral was in control of many parts of Guinea-Bissau, although the movement suffered a setback in January 1973 when he was assassinated. Lewis Cabral, brother of Amilcar and co-founder of the PAIGC, was appointed the first president of Guinea-Bissau. Following independence, local black soldiers that fought along with the Portuguese army against the PAIGC guerrillas were slaughtered by the thousands. In the late 1990s, a bitter civil war left thousands dead, wounded, and displaced. In September 2003, a coup took place in which the military arrested President Lala on the charge of being unable to solve socio-economic problems. After being delayed several times, legislative elections were held in March 2004. A mutiny of military factions in October 2004 resulted in the death of the head of the armed forces and caused widespread unrest. In June 2005, presidential elections were held for the first time since the coup that deposed Lala. Lala returned as a candidate for the PRS, claiming to be the legitimate president of the country, but the election was won by former President João Bernardo Vieira, deposed in the 1999 coup. Vieira beat Malam Bakai Sana in a runoff election, but Sana initially refused to concede, claiming that tampering occurred in 2 constituencies, including the capital, Bissau. In November 2008, President Vieira's official residence was attacked by members of the armed forces, killing a guard but leaving the president unharmed. However, on the 2nd of March 2009, Vieira was assassinated by what preliminary reports indicated to be a group of soldiers avenging the death of the head of Joint Chief of Staff, General Batista Tagme Nawai. Tagme died in an explosion a day earlier in an assassination. Military leaders in the country pledged to respect the constitutional order of succession. National Assembly Speaker Raimundo Pereira was appointed as an interim president until the nationwide election on June 28, 2009, which was won by Malam Bakar Sana. On the evening of 12th of April 2012, members of the country's military staged a coup and arrested the interim president and a leading presidential candidate. The military has yet to declare a current leader of the country. However, former Vice Chief of Staff, General Mamadou Toure Kourouma, took care of the country in the transitional period and started negotiations with opposition parties. Last week, the first set of troops arrived in Bissau, and the UN Security Council imposed travel bans on the country's military leaders.
These are weak states. These are fundamentally weak countries, and we're still experiencing the process of state formation in Africa, West Africa, as the case may be. It's something ECOWAS has to consider, but I doubt if that will happen. A lot depends on the strength of the force that ECOWAS can put together.
A lot of people don't seem to be happy with ECOWAS meddling in the internal affairs. Look at Guinea Bissau. Good elections, then the soldiers take over, yes, and ECOWAS will send in troops there to resolve it. But they have warned ECOWAS not to send in troops.
Yes. Well, I think all that is a pointer to the fact that ECOWAS itself is not a very strong organization. It's an organization set up by relatively weak states in West Africa. And the organization can't be but a reflection of the weakness of the component states. And I think that's what we're seeing. Guinea-Bissau doesn't want incursion of ECOWAS into the country, probably to afford the military junta there an opportunity to stabilize and strengthen itself. But also in view of the fact that, dominant countries in ECOWAS like Nigeria is also facing internal problems, and that they can take that position and stand by that position, and not caring what ECOWAS can do, if they can do anything at all. I think that's the scenario now, because ECOWAS will have to face up to the task of establishing a force to go into Guinea-Bissau in the first instance. So I think all those dynamics play out.
How do you manage two forces, Guinea-Bissau and Mali? Can we handle that?
I doubt it. Personally, I doubt it. Because the Mali force in the first instance is going to be very, very big. And I don't think ECOWAS has the resources to back it. Maybe we can put together the men, but the resources and the logistics will be very, very difficult. Again, without foreign support. And I bring to bear the fact that Nigeria is not economically speaking, we're not in the best of times either. So we have to consider all those factors.
Finally, what do you say? People say that the current chairman of ECOWAS, Côte d'Ivoire's president, Alassane Ouattara, came into political risky situation. For example, he was cheated at some point of the electoral victory and had to get the military to get him into power. So he has a background of you need force to get things done in West Africa. How do you think this will color his one-year reign as chairman of ECOWAS?
Well, you need force, definitely. And, I think he's simply facing up to the reality. But the extent to which force can accomplish your goals is a question. It's a critical question. It's unfortunate that most West African countries haven't cultivated, developed a culture, a democratic political culture, whereby things can be achieved through negotiation and through democratic means. Otherwise, they wouldn't call for the use of force here and there. But we can't rule out the use of force entirely. Although ECOWAS is a weak organization, and we may propose force, but sometimes we can't back it up.
Uhuru Kenyatta is the son of Kenya's famous founding leader, Jomo Kenyatta. But Kenya's deputy prime minister's political life hangs on a cliffhanger. Ahead of presidential election, he faces an indictment at the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity following post-elections violence in 2007. Uhuru denies the charges and plans to go ahead with his presidential ambition. It is a political game of wits. The ICC's prosecutor Moreno Ocampo knows the fragile peace that holds in Kenya came after compromises and a power-sharing deal was reached to end a crisis that could have brought Kenya to more chaos. So he allows Kenyatta to go ahead with his campaigns, but then time is ticking and the buns of justice always must be paid, no matter whose ox is God. Kenya was once considered the ideal democracy. No military takeovers, no post-independent civil wars, until the presidential elections on the 27th of December 2007, which altered the Kenyan fairy tale. In them, President Mwai Kibaki, under the Party of National Unity, ran for re-election against the main opposition party, the Orange Democratic Movement. The elections were seen to have been flawed, with international observers saying that they were below international standards. After a split which will take a crucial 8% of the votes away from the ODM to the newly formed Orange Democratic Movement, Kenya's candidate Kalonzo Musyoka, the race tightened between Raila Odinga and Kibaki. As the count came into the Electoral Commission of Kenya's headquarters, Odinga was shown to have a slight and then substantial lead as the results from his strongholds came in early. As the Electoral Commission continued to count the votes, Kibaki closed the gap and then overtook his opponent by a substantial margin after votes from his stronghold arrived later. This led to protests and the open discrediting of the Electoral Commission for complicity, and to Odinga declaring himself the people's president and calling for a recount. The protests escalated into ethnic violence and destruction of property. Almost 1,000 people were killed and nearly 600,000 displaced. This dispute caused underlying tensions over land and its distribution to re-erupt as it had in the 1992 and 1997 elections. Hundreds of thousands were forced off their land to relatives elsewhere in the country.
No government in Kenya! They're wrong! Government! We stand for that! We want the Human Rights Commission!
A group of eminent peasants of Africa, led by the former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan, brokered a peaceful solution to the political stalemate. On the 28th of February 2008, Kibaki and Odinga signed an agreement on the formation of a coalition government in which Odinga would become Kenya's second prime minister. Under the deal, the president would appoint cabinet ministers from both PNU and ODM camps, depending on each party's strength in parliament. The agreement stipulated that the cabinet would include a vice president and 2 deputy prime ministers. After being debated and passed by parliament, the coalition would hold until the end of the current parliament, or if either of the parties withdraws from the deal before then. The new office of the prime minister will have power and authority to coordinate and supervise the functions of the government and will be occupied by an elected member of parliament who will be the leader of the party or coalition with majority members in parliament. The world watched Kofi Annan and his UN-backed panel and former African Union chairman Jakaya Kikwete as they brought together the erstwhile rivals to the signing ceremony beamed live on Kenya national TV from the steps of Nairobi's Harambee House. On the 13th of April 2008, President Kibaki named a grand coalition cabinet of 41 ministers, including the Prime Minister and his 2 deputies, The cabinet, which included 50 assistant ministers, was sworn in at the State House in Nairobi on the 17th of April 2008 in the presence of Dr. Kofi Annan and other invited dignitaries. A constitutional change was considered that would eliminate the position of Prime Minister and simultaneously reduce the powers of the President. A referendum to vote on the proposed constitution was held on the 4th of August 2010, and the new constitution passed by a wide margin. Among other things, the new constitution delegates more power to local governments and gives Kenyans a Bill of Rights. But at the background lay a sticky issue. Kofi Annan had obtained a pledge from all parties. Suspects mentioned the post-election violence will be submitted to the International Criminal Court for investigation. Time and again, President Kibaki and Prime Minister Odinga dilly-dallied over the issue to the consternation of Mr. Annan. Only threats of sanctions and an ultimatum led President Kibaki to make the submission. On the 15th of December 2010, 6 suspects were named, notably Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. Both presidential candidates in next year's election were linked to crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court prosecutor Moreno Ocampo for planning and funding violence in Naivasha and Nakuru. He was accused of organizing a Kikuyu political religious group. The Mungiki, in the post-election violence. Uhuru Kenyatta maintained his innocence. William Ruto, on the other hand, one of the most influential people in the Rift Valley where the worst violence took place, was suspended as minister in October after being accused of corruption over a land deal. He flew to The Hague in November to try to clear his name. Ruto was accused of planning even before the election to set up militias to attack supporters of President Kibaki. Last week, Mr. Ocampo said he would not oppose a delay to the start of the trial. Kenya's electoral head last month said that an ICC trial was the biggest threat for a repeat of unrest at the 2013 election. There is concern that if the men stand trial and are blocked from running for office, it may trigger violence, he said. Past opinion polls have also shown strong public support for the ICC cases, and many Kenyans feel their own judicial system lacks the will to tackle a culture of impunity where the powerful are often seen as above the law.
Tick, tick, tick. On my way out, it's about time. Last week was the Queen of England's Diamond Jubilee. She invited several royals, including Swaziland's King Mswati. His country is embroiled in an unending economic puddle. Last year, he had to take a $1.4 million loan from neighboring South Africa to pay the salaries of public workers. But you see, the problem is deeper than it seems. King Mswati has got 13 wives. Each wife has a palace and a retinue of aides, escorts, luxury cars. All of these come with the office. This is the burden of royalty, or rather the vanity of being king. When King Mswati called for a cut in public spending, he took neither a cut in his number of wives or the number of luxurious palaces they occupy. Instead, he received a jet from an anonymous donor, a birthday gift for a king where 1 out of every 5 of his countrymen is HIV positive. An entire generation of orphans being weaned in poverty. He could have used the donation for the jets for the purchase of antiretroviral drugs, which is running out of supply in hospitals. But power isn't in short supply for Africa's last absolute king as he crushes the opposition. After all, the king can do no wrong. Everything is in short supply, out of breath, out of patience, and out of time. Thank you for watching Global Perspectives. I am Aogo Obo. Bye-bye.
And the security forces, this is how far they have come. From this point onwards, we will know whether
The next generation, your children, grandchildren, do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and enjoying hydrogen.